All right, 10-minute snack. Everyone knows the rules. Let's eat. Okay, so today I get to enjoy a snack with Dr. Bill Schindler, author of Eat Like a Human, archaeologist. And I'm super excited to talk to Dr. Bill today because we talk a lot about ancestral eating. And I feel like to start talking about ancestral eating, talking to an archaeologist is a good place to start. So, Bill, thanks for being here.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you so much.
So I want to dive in and talk a little bit about this book because I just read it and I have some questions. It's called Eat Like a Human. And I think the first thing I would like to ask you is how do we define human here?
That is a fantastic question. So when I say human, I mean, that title there, I'm referring to eating the way that our species should be eating to achieve optimal health and live our best life. But the term human is much larger than Homo sapiens. So most people would consider human being the past 2.5 million years. So from our first Homo ancestor, Homo habilis. Some even extend that back a little bit further for about 3.5 or so million years. But for the most part, we're talking about any member of our ancestral species from the genus Homo.
Okay, great. So that kind of brings me to the next point. So I was hoping that was what we were going to talk about is one of the reasons I love this book. There's a lot of reasons, but in it you talk a lot about. I'm a big meat advocate, carnivore diet eater, and so I talk a lot about meat, obviously, but people need to and some like incorporate foods outside of meat. And one of the things I love about this book is you talk a lot about not necessarily what to eat. You do talk about what to eat, but how to eat it, which goes into like how to prep these foods. And so one of the questions I want to talk to you is, and I like to kind of put time frame on something we can grasp our heads around. So like we talk about 3 million years as human, that's a long time. And so I say, like, we put that on a calendar year. Homo sapien is roughly 300,000 years. Is that correct?
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. So if we just took Homo sapien, that's our modern species, and we put Homo sapien on a calendar year, day one, January 1st, was the start of Homo sapien 300,000 years ago. Today, let's just say it's December 31st, the last tick of time. We put 300,000 years into one calendar year. My understanding would be our agriculture started about 2 weeks ago. So for 50 weeks out of the 52 weeks, we didn't have agriculture because agriculture roughly 10,000 years ago. Is my understanding that correct?
Yeah, that'd be very correct. And so remember what that also means is that, our ancestors for those other 50 weeks were consuming completely wild, foods that they got from their natural environment. The majority of it and the most nutrient dense and bioavailable would be animals. And then they were consuming plants, but they were consuming wild plants. And the issue, and I hope I can do this in really short for each, and I only have a couple minutes. Every food that we've included, almost every food that we've included and introduced into our diets over the past several million years requires some sort of technology to either get that food or to process that food to get it ready for our incredibly inefficient human digestive tracts. And as we did a better job of creating those technologies and those approaches, our bodies and brains were supported nutritionally to grow. So here we are living in these bodies for those 50 weeks, in bodies that are with these brains that are so incredibly nutrient needy. And the only way we can nutritionally support them is through those technologies. But a big important thing to remember here is that technology plays a very large role in our dietary past. And if you divide, including technologies related to including animals in our diets and technologies required to include plants in our diets, there's a big difference. That most of the technologies that we invented to include animals in our diets were about getting that animal, overcoming our physical limitations, and creating hunting at a distance, creating spears and atlatls and woomeras and boomerangs and throwing sticks and traps and nets and fishing hooks and all those sorts of things. But once you have that animal, you are looking at a pile of some of the most nutrient dense, safe, bioavailable food on the planet, and all you need is a sharp edge to get into it. So there's not many technologies created to make that food safer or to make it more bioavailable. It already is. It's about getting the animal. But plants are different. Up until the agricultural revolution, and then everything changes, including the technologies that we created to include our plants in our diets, weren't so much about getting the plants, right? Maybe a digging stick to get some roots, or something to cut something off of a tree. But for the most part, we got these things with our hands, but it was about making these plants safe, detoxifying them. And even though plants have nutrients, we almost always have to do something to those plants to make those nutrients bioavailable. And I think that's a big difference that we really need to keep in mind. Technology is about animals, we're getting the animal, and then you have this incredible nutrition in front of you. Technology is about plants, we're all about detoxifying and making those nutrients bioavailable.
So prior to the agricultural revolution, we'll just date it 10,000 years ago or 2 weeks ago, depending on how we look at it. I love reading, archaeology, because to me, I'm, this ancestral movement, I feel like that's kind of the root of it. Like, what are we designed to eat? And this discordance theory, I feel like, is they're at least very directionally correct that, we have these Stone Age bodies living in a fast food world. So when I'm reading through archaeology stuff, your stuff, Mickey Bendor, I love his stuff. And it seems like I'm just curious, like, what other plant foods prior to the agricultural revolution were we eating in significant quantities? And by significant, I mean like at least semi reoccurrent and some quantities, because to me it feels like tubers would be maybe the only thing that would make any sense.
Tubers for sure. In fact, there is a suggestion that, and we don't have direct evidence for this archaeologically, but there is a suggestion that, and a strong one, that tubers entered our diets very, very early on. They're incredibly calorie rich for sure. Easy to access when you know where they are. They provide, calories. And the best time to get a root corm or a tuber, we call them underground storage organs, is because the best time to get them is in the winter, right? When they're full of all the starch that they've, amassed throughout the other parts of the year. And that's how that plant lives. So, if you know where they are in the summertime, you go back to the same place, dig these things up and eat them. The problem, so potentially that, roots, corms, and tubers, and those sorts of things. There is some suggestion that there's the mast, or acorns and nut meats and those sorts of things. The thing that we often forget in our archaeological interpretation of ancestral diets when we're including these things is that they're all very toxic, especially the roots. And if you're consuming those roots, you need those underground storage organs, you almost always need some form of a detoxification strategy to make them safe. Now, number one, it's almost always peeling. So, all plants have some level of toxin, and they're there to protect the important parts of the plants. And underground storage organs are notoriously high in toxin loads to protect it from predators and insects and fungus and those sorts of things. And often a large amount of the toxins are in the skin, right? Potatoes are a great example. That's in the skin to protect them, but they're also on the inside. And there's a number of different strategies depending on the toxin to detoxify, but it's a lot of work. So it's not just like digging this thing up and then starting to munch on it. And it's certainly not digging it up and just throwing it on a fire and starting to munch on it. And same sort of things like acorns. Acorns were a food that we do think that more recently in our prehistoric past were important parts of diets, but they are filled with tannic acid, in some cases in very high levels. And tannic acid is water soluble. They need to be leached. There's a ton of processing involved. So we're confident there were plants in the diet at different times. But the way that we think about including plants in our diets today, and the way that we go to the grocery store and buy certain plants and include them in our diet, is completely different than they were in the past. First of all, you're not shipping produce from Argentina up to New Jersey and then eating it in different times of the year and have strawberry. You're by default eating incredibly hyper local and incredibly hyper seasonal. So it isn't that you can eat this and eat it all year round, because it's only available through certain times of the year. I do think from a fundamental toxic level, those plants that were included in our diets that have certain toxic loads, that if you eat them every day or twice a day for the majority of your life, you end up with a lot of problems. You didn't have an issue like that in the past because you only had it for 2 weeks and it wasn't available again until 52 weeks later, and then it's available. So I do think there were some limiting mechanisms when it comes to the plants in our diets that are no longer limiting mechanisms today when we make choices about food. Hyper seasonality, hyper localness, also the processing involved with just taking this raw material and getting the food out of it ready to eat. So nuts are a fantastic example. If I told, first of all, most people don't shell their own nuts. Most people don't collect their own nuts, and most people don't know that there's actually a hole outside of the shell itself. So if I said, go eat, go eat a bunch of almonds, here's some rocks to crack it open. You got to collect them. You got to take the hull off. You got to crack the shell open. You got to pick the nut meats out, and then you have some food. And after a day's work, you got a handful of almonds. But today we can go to Costco and buy a huge bag of almonds for $10 and sit there and eat them all day. And we don't have all of those other limiting mechanisms. So it isn't that, they included this in their diet and they had it every day. It's, when plants were probably in diets in the past, they were there for 2 weeks, then they weren't there again for another year, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's super fascinating, because one of the pieces of advice I tend to give to people, because of exactly what you said, is it seems counterintuitive, but I'm like, if you're going to incorporate plants on a regular basis, you should find a spread, because they're going to have different toxic loads, like the glycoalkaloids in the potatoes versus, like you said, tannins and acorns. And so counterintuitively, perhaps it's better to diversify your plant-based eating if you're going to eat them on an ongoing basis.
Oh, 100%. And just to bring that year calendar back into our vision, because I think that was great. So for the 50 weeks, and again, remember, that calendar is just based on Homo sapiens, right?
Exactly.
If we think about humans in general, that calendar gets even more profound of that difference. But if you're looking at, the wild plants that are in our diets, we're talking about a little bit of hundreds of different plants in our yearly diet. Different plant parts, different plants over, a little bit of this, then a little more of this, then a little bit of this, changing throughout the year. And then when we hit the agricultural revolution, everything changes. And people who were, their ancestors were eating hundreds and hundreds of plants in a given year are now literally basing their entire diet on 1 or 2 crops. 1 or 2 crops, and they're almost always annual grasses, loaded with lectins and phytates and other issues like oxalates. And that becomes the mainstay of the diet. So the diversity goes down, the nutrient diversity goes down, and the safety plummets at the same time.
Yeah, I think I read that wheat, corn, and rice, just 3 grains, make up 50% of the world's calories. Like,
I wouldn't be surprised. It might even be more than that. Yeah,
it might be. So I know we're probably running over because I talked too long, but there was a couple other questions, if you don't mind.
Go ahead. Absolutely.
We'll have an extended snack. So let's do 3 semi-quick questions. One is coffee. That's kind of like a staple for, I don't know, everyone in the modern world. Is there safe coffee? Is it a health food? Is it not a health food? What any thoughts on coffee?
I can tell you 2 things. One is I'm not an expert on coffee.
Okay.
I don't know that answer, but I'll tell you what I do, if that makes any difference. Caffeine has, we do know caffeine plants that have caffeine have been in our diets for some time. And we do know this. Here in Eastern North America, there's a plant called Yaupon holly, which is also known as Ilex flammatoria, which is the genus and species. Long story about where the name comes from, but it is the only plant in Eastern North America that native plant that contains caffeine and has been in use for thousands and thousands of years. I don't know if that helps anybody think, make a decision about themselves, but I do drink coffee. It is one of my vices. And I drink quite a bit of it.
Okay. So that's great. So that I consider when I talk about coffee, I'm like, I take it in and out just to make sure, but I'm like, I'm pretty convinced it's not a health food, but it's just, is it causing negative consequences? That's how I think about it.
As far as I know, but I'm not an expert on it. I agree with that 100%.
Okay. This is really a question that has kind of bothered me for a long time. And so I would love your perspective on it, because I think you maybe even have a counter perspective than me. And it's the importance of fire in human evolution, because I believe it was obviously important for a number of reasons. However, I often hear the argument like, you need to cook the meat so you can get the nutrients out of it. It makes it easier to eat XYZ. And here I am sitting eating basically a raw steak. I finish it in 2 minutes. My jaw's not tired. It took me no time. While my girlfriend's eating a salad and it takes her 35 minutes. I'm like, I'm getting way more nutrition. It's easy. It's fast. My digestion is great with it. Maybe it takes 10% more energy to process that meat that's raw versus cooked. Is that really a game changer in human evolution? I just love to hear your thoughts.
So first off, I thought you were going to ask me about alcohol after the coffee comment. So I'm relieved that I missed that. I dodged that one. So yes, first of all, the difference between the salad and the steak are apples and oranges for sure. And one thing we know about herbivores is that herbivores who are eating a raw diet are literally chewing most of their waking day in order to get the nutrients that they need. Here's my take on fire as it relates to animals, and I'm taking some of this from Richard Wrangham, who is a fantastic primatologist from Harvard, and I had a great conversation with him once over breakfast, and we were going to have a little more nutrition from it if you physically break it down first. So if you think about going to a really nice restaurant and ordering raw meat, you get it one of two ways: either tartare, which is ground beef or ground meat, or carpaccio, which is sliced super thin. That just, if you think about what that mechanical breakdown already did, that now your jaw doesn't have to work so hard, that helps. Secondly, from a chemical perspective, cooking a little bit, according to Richard Wrangham, helps a little bit with the digestibility and the bioavailability. So, after this conversation, I left feeling that the maximum, the best way to consume beef to get the maximum amount of nutrients and your body works the least hard would be like a medium rare hamburger, right? If you overcook the meat, it goes the other way and it becomes,
Okay.
but so just a tiny bit of cooking and some mechanical breakdown can help maximize the bioavailability of it. But that doesn't mean that you're not getting incredible nutrition from eating it raw and chewing on it and your body's doing it. It just means that you can, sort of bio or steak hack that just a touch in order to maximize it, if that helps at all.
I'd love to take identical twins, put them on the exact same diet, one eating raw steak, one eating like medium well steak. Because technically the one eating the raw steak should, if it was like a fat loss thing, should like lose more weight because the body's expending more energy to consume the exact same amount of food.
Absolutely.
I don't know if we would see that. I don't know. I mean, I trust you and I trust Dr. Wrangham, believe his name is.
Yeah.
But he's the Harvard. He's done tons of work on this in Harvard. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so thank you for that answer. That basically answered one last thing on fire. There seems to be a lot of debate. Like I thought there was like consensus around 500,000 years ago where we routinely using fire. And now, your book says that maybe it's, it was a little bit earlier than that, maybe 2 million years ago.
Yeah. So first off, there's consensus. Well, there's a lot of people that don't think the Earth is older than several thousand years. So, but there's consensus in general that about 500,000 years ago, we have control over fire. There's some interpretations of archaeological evidence, direct archaeological evidence for control of fire, or at least fire, at about 1 million years. Me and several other anthropologists, archaeologists suggest it's much older than that, at around 2 million years. And I truly believe that for a couple of reasons. There is not direct evidence for 2 million years, but here's a couple of things that I think are important for us to consider. Imagine what it takes to get to the point where you can take fire, you can start it at will, control the temperature, control the flame, put it out at will. Most animals on this planet are deathly afraid of fire. Then they run the other way. There's a great book written by, I'll remember in a minute. There's a great book that suggests, and this is where I started thinking about it the first time, that not only does control of fire start at about 2 million years, but to get to the point where we're controlling fire, then we have had to start to form that relationship with fire millions of years earlier, to start to understand that, hey, we can be near it. Hey, there's a reason we might, there's warmth, there's light. The insects that are drawn by the fire are insects that we eat anyhow, and here we can go there and collect them. When the fire's done, there's cooked animals left behind that we can go ahead and eat. And, when we see it burning through the woods and then all of a sudden it runs out of trees and the fire goes out, maybe we can fuel this fire by putting wood on it and continue to have it grow and continue to maintain it. And most importantly, but the largest jump to me, other than that initial jump where we're not running from it, we're going towards it, is starting a fire from scratch. Just starting it from scratch, like with nothing else, creating an ember, to get to that point, it must have been a very, very long journey. And I'll say two quick things. And I know we're running out of time, but we'll have to do this again. But two quick things that I think are important as far as fire is concerned and our image of it in the past. Number one, the one of the reasons that I'm convinced that 2 million years is the time that it starts is that we use fire for many different purposes. We don't think about it today because we can turn on switches and heat our homes and turn on lights and all this, but fire was used for warmth, it was used for light, it was used to process materials, it was used for detoxification, it was used for cooking. And right about 1.8 million years ago, so right around 2 million years ago, our ancestors for the first time ever started going into northern latitudes. They started moving up, into Asia, up into Europe. And it's at the same time period that we start the last ice age. So it's the most ironic thing at all that we have ancestors moving north at the same time that we have the ice age starting. And the only way that they could do that was if they could control their microclimate. Not only do they have fire that allows them to do all sorts of other things, but it allows them to stay warm enough that they're literally not dying. The second thing I'd like to just bring up real quick is this point is, when I started to learn how to make fire by friction and do all these other sorts of primitive skills, I had this image in my head that anytime our ancestors needed fire, they took out two sticks and rubbed them together and made a fire. And that was, well, that's probably not very accurate. I have a really good friend. His name is Seamus Caulfield. He's one of the most famous archaeologists in Ireland, and he grew up in this tiny little fishing village in the northwest coast in County Mayo, in a little village called Kildare, little fishing village. And he said he grew up and he had fire. Fire was incredibly important to him his entire life. That's where they got there. He had no electricity. They had no running water. Fire was used for heating. Fire was used for light, and fire was used for cooking. And it wasn't until he was in his 30s that he saw a fire lit for the first time. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand. He says, we just never let it go out. Like, it was so important, it never went out. Wow. And that is so vital, crucial, central to his life. He never saw a fire started because they banked the fire at night. At the next day, they pulled the thing, pulled it aside, right, got the embers going again, and just got it going. I mean, the man never saw a match lit, never saw a lighter lit. It was just the way that it was going. So when we have fire, we have fire and we maintain fire, and it's central to so many different things.
That's so interesting. I've never even thought about that, where it's maybe the ability to start a fire from scratch was significantly after the point that we were using fire all the time already.
Yeah. I mean, there's a great movie from the late 70s called Quest for Fire. And for the 70s, they did a fantastic job. But that's the central part of that story. Like, they have fire, it went out, and they went on a quest to go find fire again from a lightning strike or, some natural phenomenon.
Right.
I highly recommend watching that movie. It's dated, but it's actually pretty good.
I'll have to see it because I also have something else on my to watch list, The Great Human Race, the reality TV show you were in. One quick question about that. Before I watch it, you can go ahead and give me the spoiler. And if people are teeing it up to watch it, this will be the spoiler. Did you mainly subsist on meat?
We ate a lot of meat. Or a lot of animal. We ate a lot of animal.
Right.
The quick spoiler is, if you're going to watch one episode 6 is my favorite. That was in the Republic of Georgia, and I think you'd really like it. It had laddles and the whole nine. But no, we ate a ton of animal, and we were trying to relay an important message at the same time as us doing it. And this is part reality, part educational, all of that. And we wanted to make sure the message was sent properly. So the first episode, we had no fire. It was 2.5 million years ago. We had no fire. We're sleeping up in trees to protect ourselves. I mean, it was crazy. But when we do bring animals in to it, we're eating all of it.
Yeah, that's what I assume. I thoroughly enjoyed this snack. I know it turned into a mini meal, but I think the listeners will forgive us. I just want to say, last thing is this book here, Eat Like a Human. Highly recommend it. It's so good, and it goes through in a lot more detail some of the things we talked about, like detoxifying potatoes and acorns. If you're going to eat these foods, what are the best ways to do that to keep yourself from getting sick, staying as healthy as possible? So I loved it. Dr. Bill, thank you for the time today and for letting me enjoy a snack with you. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Snack time's over. Did you enjoy the snack? If so, drop me a comment. Let me know if we should dive deeper and do a full meal on this topic. Also, P.S. if you liked the snacks, you're going to love our bites. A daily email bite, a golden nugget, better than a pasture-raised egg yolk. All right, maybe not that good, but it is a daily bite to optimize your health and nutrition with a meat-based diet. Access right now is totally free. Link below. See you in the bites.